Snow blanketed Silverpine Ridge when a newly arrived officer first met Parker, a German shepherd with piercing amber eyes that seemed to carry untold secrets. From that moment on, the bond between man and dog began to unravel hidden truths buried deep within the town. What they uncovered would shake the community to its core and ignite a story of courage, loyalty, and silent guardianship. Watch now to discover this moving story. Snow covered the ridges of Silverpine like a white quilt pulled tight across the mountains. The town below lay quiet under the winter air, rooftops pressed with frost and narrow streets lined with tall pines. Elliot Ward guided his old sedan along the winding road, his eyes steady on the trail ahead. For the first time in months, he felt a kind of silence that did not press against his chest. He had left the city behind after too many restless nights and the end of a marriage that had drained more than it gave. Silverpine Ridge was small, tucked away, and promised a slower rhythm. That was all he wanted now. He carried one duffel bag, a box of files, and a hope that this move might give him space to breathe again. The sheriff's station stood at the edge of town, a two-story brick building with a row of flags snapping in the cold wind. Inside, warmth replaced the sharp air. The faint smell of coffee mixed with paper and polished floors. Elliot stepped through the door, his boots leaving light tracks of slush behind him. Sheriff Harold Brighton was waiting near the reception desk. A broad man with gray at his temples, he shook Elliot's hand firmly. "Welcome to Silverpine Ridge. We could use someone with your experience." Elliot nodded. His years in military police had left their mark in his posture and voice. "Glad to be here, sir. I am ready to serve." The sheriff's tone was steady. "You will find things quieter here, but that does not mean simple. This town has its shadows." He motioned down the hall. "You will get your locker, your schedule, and your new partner." The word made Elliot pause. He had worked with fellow officers before, but the sheriff meant something else. They stopped before a steel door with a small window. Behind the glass moved the shape of a dog, large and restless. Amber eyes caught the light, sharp yet weary. "This is Parker," the sheriff said. "He is 5 years old, trained in search and protection. His previous handler transferred last month. The dog has not adjusted well since then." Elliot leaned slightly to the glass. The shepherd's coat shimmered sable and black, the body poised and alert. There was strength in his frame, but also something guarded in the way he paced. The eyes held a story untold. "I will meet him tomorrow?" Elliot asked. "Yes. Take tonight to settle in. Parker is cautious with strangers, but he is skilled more than most. Earning his trust will take time." The sheriff clapped Elliot on the shoulder. "You will be introduced in the training room in the morning. Deputy Ricky will assist." The name registered in Elliot's mind without weight. At that moment, his attention stayed with the dog behind the glass. Parker had stopped pacing. He stood still, ears high, eyes locked on Elliot. For a brief second, Elliot felt as if the animal was measuring him, searching for something beyond the uniform. Later, in the small cabin above the grocery store that now served as his home, Elliot placed his duffel by the bed and sat near the window. Outside, snow drifted in quiet sheets, settling over the roofs of Silverpine. He thought of Parker's gaze, steady and unreadable, and wondered what history lived inside those amber eyes. Elliot wanted peace, but life in the mountains was rarely simple. The town carried its own weight, its own silences. He sensed it in the sheriff's words, in the way the cold seemed to whisper through the pines. And tomorrow, he would face the first test. Behind that steel door waited a partner who did not yet accept him. A dog who had lost someone. A guardian with secrets in his stare. Morning light spread thin across the peaks of Silverpine Ridge. Elliot walked through the frosted streets, his breath visible in the chill. The sheriff's station looked calmer than the city posts he had left behind, but he knew appearances could mislead. Today he would meet Parker face to face. The training room was plain, lined with mats, wooden benches, and a rack of equipment. Sunlight fell through tall windows, catching the dust in slow spirals. At the center, Parker waited. The German shepherd stood still, his sable coat bright against the dull floor, ears tilted forward, body steady as stone. Elliot entered quietly, his boots soft against the mats. He crouched to lower his stance, letting the dog see his hands. "Morning, partner," he said in a calm tone. Parker did not move closer. He simply watched, amber eyes sharp, as if weighing every gesture. The silence stretched. Elliot held his posture, patient, steady. In his years of service, he had learned that respect was not taken. It was offered first. Parker's tail gave a faint twitch, then stilled. A subtle sign, but enough to tell Elliot the dog was listening, even if wary. The door creaked open. Deputy Ricky stepped in, carrying a folder under one arm. His presence shifted the air, mid-40s, broad frame, sharp smile that felt more rehearsed than warm. "So, this is the new team," Ricky said, his voice smooth. Elliot Ward and Parker, quite the pair. The moment Ricky crossed the room, Parker moved. He stepped forward, placing himself directly between Elliot and the deputy. His body tensed, chest low, a deep growl rising from within. The sound filled the quiet space, low and steady. A warning. Elliot straightened slowly, surprised but not alarmed. He glanced at Ricky. "Seems he does not like your company." Ricky lifted both hands in mock surrender, a smirk at the edge of his mouth. Dogs choose their loyalties in strange ways. Maybe he still misses his old handler. He set the folder down on the bench. "You will have to teach him new habits." Parker's gaze never left Ricky. The shepherd's hackles rose slightly, his stance firm. To Elliot, it looked less like habit and more like instinct. The dog sensed something and made it clear with every line of his body. Ricky chuckled and took a step back. "Relax. He will settle down once he knows the routine." He gave Elliot a look, steady and measured. "Out here, trust is important. You will learn who deserves it." Then he turned toward the door, the sound of his boots fading down the hall. As soon as Ricky left, Parker's growl faded, but his body remained alert. He turned his head slightly toward Elliot, eyes bright, as if checking whether Elliot had noticed. Elliot crouched again, his voice calm. "I saw it, Parker. Message received." The dog blinked once, a slow, deliberate gesture, before stepping back into his corner. Elliot stayed there for another minute, watching the shepherd settle but never relax. He knew then that Parker carried more than training scars. He carried knowledge, and perhaps suspicion, of what moved in the shadows of Silverpine. Later that afternoon, Elliot wandered the station's halls, familiarizing himself with the layout. The rhythm of the place was slower than the city, but carried its own tension. On a bulletin board near the break room, a stack of papers caught his eye. He pulled one loose. It was a local article, grainy photo on the front page. The headline spoke of another missing child, the third in recent months. The picture showed a little girl bundled in a coat, clutching a worn stuffed bear, her eyes wide and searching. Elliot felt his chest tighten. Silverpine Ridge might look calm under its snow, but there were stories hidden under that white silence. Elliot held the article in his hands a moment longer, his eyes moving over the lines with a weight that grew heavier with each word. 3 children gone in less than 2 months. Each Each vanished near the wooded edge of town. The descriptions were vague, the timelines unclear, but the fear beneath the print was real. The photograph on the page clung to him most. A little girl bundled against the cold. A stuffed bear pressed tight to her chest. Her eyes seemed to search beyond the frame, as though she had seen something no one else noticed. Elliot folded the paper and slipped it back under the stack. He moved toward the break room, his boots echoing softly down the hall. A few deputies sat at tables, chatting in low voices about weather and supply runs. None spoke about the children. The silence around the subject felt deliberate. A wall no one wanted to touch. Parker walked beside him, his nails clicking lightly against the floor. The dog's ears shifted with every sound, alert yet calm. When they passed the bulletin board again, Parker paused. His nose brushed the corner of the stack of flyers. Then he gave a short, low huff. Elliot looked down at him, uneasy. "You feel it too," he murmured. The break room was warm but stale, coffee lingering in the air. Elliot poured himself a cup, sat near the window, and stared at the snow falling in soft drifts outside. He thought of his transfer papers, of the promise of quiet. Yet here he was, staring at stories of children whose names had become only headlines. Deputy Ricky entered a few minutes later, carrying a thermos. He nodded toward Elliot. "Settling in all right?" His tone was light, but his eyes flicked toward Parker with that same cool measure. Parker shifted closer to Elliot's leg, silent yet watchful. Elliot lifted his cup. "I saw the reports. Missing children. 3 cases. Ricky's smile thinned. "Tragic. Most likely accidents. The woods can be unforgiving. Kids wander. They get lost." He took a slow sip from the thermos. "The town does not need panic, though. People here hold to peace where they can." Elliot studied him, weighing the words. Ricky spoke smoothly, yet his ease felt forced. The kind of ease that dodged the truth rather than faced it. Parker's stare followed Ricky until he left the room. Then the dog finally sat down, close and steady. The rest of the afternoon passed in small tasks: lockers, files, maps of patrol routes. Yet Elliot's mind stayed with the photograph. The stuffed bear, the child's wide eyes, the way the article leaned more on reassurance than on facts. He had learned long ago that silence could hide more than noise. As the day ended, Elliot stepped outside. The air cut sharp, the kind that reached through layers of fabric to the skin. Street lamps glowed against the snow, halos of light marking each corner. The town looked peaceful, but he could not shake the feeling that something watched from beyond the trees. Parker stood beside him, amber eyes turned toward the ridge. His breath rose in small clouds, steady, patient. Elliot reached down and let his hand rest against the shepherd's fur. "We will find out what this place is hiding," he said quietly. The dog gave a single blink, slow and deliberate, as if sealing a pact. Somewhere beyond those pines, stories had been buried under ice and silence. Elliot knew his next patrol would not be simple. And on that path, he would meet someone who carried part of the truth, a child whose gaze would strike with the weight of memory. The morning patrol carried Elliot and Parker through the quieter lanes of Silverpine Ridge. Snow lay thick on rooftops, smoke curling from chimneys, children's sleds left frozen near fences. The town looked ordinary at a glance, yet Elliot felt the same undercurrent as the day before, a silence stretched too thin. They drove toward the southern edge where homes thinned into open fields and pine. Parker sat in the back, his gaze shifting often, ears twitching as if every gust of wind carried meaning. Elliot trusted that sense. The dog missed little. As they turned a corner, Elliot slowed the patrol SUV. Ahead stood a weathered cottage tucked behind a short wooden fence. Beside the gate, a girl crouched in the snow. She wore a puffy lilac coat and mittens that brushed the ground as she reached down. In one hand was a dish, in the other a crust of bread. A ginger cat circled her boots, tail high, eager for the food. Elliot pulled over and rolled the window down. "Everything all right out here?" The girl looked up, cheeks bright from the cold. Her eyes held a directness uncommon for her age. "She's hungry," she answered, nodding toward the cat. "Her name is Marigold. She likes toast, but only if it has butter." Elliot smiled faintly, then stepped out, snow crunching under his boots. "That's kind of you. What's your name?" "Joanna Parker," she replied with quiet pride. She could not have been older than 8. Her long brown hair peeked from beneath a knit hat, strands catching bits of snow. Elliot crouched to her level. "Officer Elliot Ward. I'm new here." Joanna studied him a moment, then turned her eyes to the SUV. Parker had stepped out, tail low, posture steady. The shepherd paused only a few feet away. His gaze locked on Joanna as though he recognized her. For a moment, neither moved. Joanna tilted her head, and Parker's ears twitched. It was a silent exchange, brief but filled with something Elliot could not name. The girl's mittened hand lowered slightly, and the shepherd's eyes softened, his breath fogging in small bursts. Marigold brushed against Joanna's leg, breaking the spell. The girl smiled and placed the dish down for the cat. Elliot straightened, his eyes drifting to the cottage behind her. The paint had faded, but smoke rose from the chimney. 2 bicycles leaned against the porch, one larger, one smaller. The place looked lived in, though weathered by years of winter. He glanced back at Parker, who still stood alert, his body angled toward the tree line beyond the cottage. The forest pressed close, its branches heavy with snow, shadows deep where the fence had collapsed. "Do you play back there often?" Elliot asked, nodding to the woods. Joanna hesitated, her mitten brushing the edge of the dish. "Sometimes I look for squirrels. I'm not supposed to go far." Elliot gave a slow nod. "If you ever hear something that makes you uneasy, you go straight inside. Promise me that." Her eyes lingered on Parker before she nodded. "I promise." The cat finished eating and purred against her coat. Parker finally eased a step forward, nose lifted, drawing in the air. His tail stiffened, and a low rumble stirred in his chest, quiet but firm. Elliot saw it instantly. The shift in the dog's posture, the way his paws planted against the snow. The forest behind the cottage loomed, still and white, yet Parker stared at it as if it breathed. Elliot's hand moved instinctively to the leash. "Easy, partner," he murmured, though his own pulse had quickened. Something beyond those trees called to the shepherd. Something hidden. The air shifted. Parker's muscles drew tight, his nose cutting through the cold, as if the snow itself carried a secret. The rumble in his chest deepened, no longer a quiet warning, but a sound with weight. Elliot tightened his grip on the leash, bracing. "Parker," he said low, steady, but the shepherd's focus did not break. His eyes locked on the gap where the fence had splintered and fallen. A jagged opening pressed against the tree line. Joanna looked up at Elliot, her mitten pressing close to the cat in her arms. "Is he mad?" Elliot shook his head. "He smells something. That's his way of telling us." He crouched near the broken fence. Snow lay piled against the collapsed boards, yet beneath it he saw lines where footsteps had pressed through before the last storm. The tracks were faint, nearly swallowed, but enough for Parker to notice. The dog pulled forward, his paws digging into the snow. His breath came fast, white clouds in the cold air. Elliot steadied him, scanning the dark band of forest. Branches hung heavy, needles crusted with ice, the shadows thick beyond the first line of trees. He glanced back at Joanna. "Stay close to your house. Tell your mother if you see anyone near this fence." The girl's eyes grew wide. "Someone's been back there?" Elliot kept his voice calm. "I don't know yet, but I need you to be careful." Parker tugged again, his body firm against the leash. He pressed his nose to the snow, sniffed, then raised his head sharply, ears standing tall. He barked once, sharp and echoing, the sound bouncing through the pines. The noise startled Joanna. Marigold darted toward the porch, tail fluffed. Elliot tightened his grip and pulled Parker back a step. The shepherd resisted, his gaze still fixed on the woods. Elliot scanned the ground once more. A path lay half-hidden beyond the broken boards, narrow but worn, as though someone had walked it many times. The snow covered much, yet the shape remained. A trail leading into the forest, concealed behind the collapsed fence where no child should wander. He stood, unease pressing into his chest. The missing children came back to his thoughts, their faces printed on faded flyers. The stuffed bear from the article lingered in his mind. Parker gave another growl, deep and certain. Elliot laid a hand on the shepherd's back, steadying him. "I see it," he whispered. "You're right. Something's there." Joanna stepped closer to the porch, her breath fogging in the cold. "Officer Elliot?" He turned to her, softening his tone. "Go inside now. Stay with your mother." The girl nodded quickly and ran to the door, her boots scattering snow. She looked back once more before stepping in, her face pale but curious. Elliot waited until the door shut, then crouched again near the gap. Parker pressed his nose into the snow, pawing once at the ground, then lifting his head toward the trees. His eyes glowed with an intensity Elliot could not dismiss. There was a story written in that trail, a story covered in snow, yet alive in Parker's senses. Elliot knew he would return. Not today, not with Joanna watching, but soon. He led Parker back to the SUV, the dog still pulling slightly toward the woods. The engine started, and warmth filled the cabin, but the air between them carried the weight of what they had seen. As Elliot guided the vehicle down the narrow road, Parker sat upright in the back, his gaze pressed against the window, eyes fixed on the forest until it vanished from sight. The town stretched quiet ahead, but Elliot's mind stayed behind, at that broken fence and the path that disappeared into shadows. He had no proof yet, only instinct and the certainty in his partner's stance. By late afternoon, the roads grew busier with trucks from the timber yard. Elliot turned toward the main street, his eyes catching on something unusual up ahead. A gray pickup sat at the edge of the road, snow gathered around its tires. Parker's ears flicked, his body shifting at once. He pressed his nose to the glass, breath fogging the window as his chest tightened with a growl. The gray pickup sat half buried in snow, angled at the edge of the road as though parked in a hurry. Its windows were tinted, the body streaked with salt from old drives. But there were no company logos or plates on the front bumper. Elliot slowed the patrol SUV and pulled to the side. Parker was already on edge. The shepherd pressed forward, nose close to the glass, his breath clouding the window. A low growl stirred deep in his chest, steady and unbroken. "Easy," Elliot said, though his own pulse quickened. He stepped out, boots crunching against the frozen ground. Parker leapt down after him, leash tight in Elliot's grip. The dog's body tensed as he sniffed the air, head low, tail rigid. Elliot walked around the truck, his eyes scanning. Snow lay disturbed near the tires, not by driving, but by pacing, circles of boot prints that moved back and forth. He leaned closer. The bed of the truck held a large tarp stretched over stacked shapes. Snow dusted the cover, but the weight beneath looked heavy, too deliberate. Parker pulled toward the driver's door, his nose pressing against the seam. His growl deepened, vibrating through the leash. Elliot crouched, peering into the crack of the window, but the tint kept the interior hidden. He tried the handle. Locked. The radio at his chest crackled. "Unit 4, this is Ricky. Where are you?" Elliot pressed the mic. "South end of Silverpine, near the timber yard access road. There's a gray pickup here. Suspicious position. No plates on the front." A pause followed. Then Ricky's voice returned, smooth but firm. "It's hunting season. Locals park all over the place. Best not to stir anything. Head back toward your route." Elliot frowned, glancing at Parker, who remained stiff beside the door. "The bed looks loaded. Tarp over crates or something similar. Fresh tracks, too." Ricky's tone lightened, almost casual. "Happens all the time. Hunters stash gear, keep it covered from the snow. No need to waste energy. Stay on the patrol grid." The line went quiet. Elliot clipped the mic back to his vest. Parker pressed harder against the truck, his nose wedged near the passenger side, body trembling with alertness. His amber eyes cut to Elliot, burning with intent. "I know," Elliot murmured. "You don't trust it." He crouched beside the shepherd, laying a steady hand along his flank. Parker's breath came fast, fogging in the cold, but he held his stance. Elliot pulled a small notebook from his jacket and marked the coordinates, jotting the details of the scene. He snapped a quick photo of the plates on the rear bumper, half covered by snow but still legible. When he rose, Parker barked once, sharp, the sound echoing through the trees. Elliot gave the leash a gentle tug, guiding him back. The shepherd resisted for a moment, then followed, eyes never leaving the truck. Back in the SUV, Elliot let the heater run, the windows fogging slightly from their breath. Parker stood in the back, watching through the rear glass, his gaze locked on the pickup until it disappeared from view. Elliot gripped the wheel. Ricky's dismissal left a sour taste. He had seen enough to know the truck was not ordinary, and Parker had confirmed it with every tense line of his body. As the SUV rolled through the narrow streets, Elliot's eyes caught on another path, one he had not yet traveled. A small dirt road veered off the main route, leading deeper toward the old farm lots at the edge of town. Snow drifted heavy over its entrance, untouched for weeks, maybe months. Parker shifted, nose lifting, ears pressed forward. A sound rose from his chest, quiet, certain. Elliot slowed, his eyes following the line of trees beyond the drift. Somewhere down that road stood an old storage barn he had noticed on the map, marked abandoned. Yet Parker's posture told him the place held more than dust. The road narrowed as Elliot guided the SUV through the drift, the tires crunching against hard snow. The trees leaned close, branches heavy with frost. Parker stood braced in the back, nose pressed to the glass, his breath fogging the pain. The dog's body carried a tension that only sharpened as they drew nearer. The barn appeared after a bend, its red paint worn to gray, roof slumped under years of weather. Snow piled against its base, but the padlock on the side door gleamed newer than the wood it clung to. Elliot slowed, parking near a rusted tractor that leaned in silence. Parker leapt down as soon as the door opened, his paws striking the snow with purpose. He pulled toward the barn, ears tall, tail stiff, nose cutting the air as if following a trail invisible to human eyes. Elliot followed, scanning the clearing. No fresh tire marks, no clear footprints, yet the stillness felt staged. The shepherd circled the side wall, pawing at the frozen ground. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Elliot crouched where Parker had stopped. Against the splintered wood, tufts of fur clung to the grain. He brushed the frost away and felt the coarse strands, caught like evidence left behind. Near the base, the snow was stained faintly, a rusty shadow against the white. Blood. Elliot's jaw tightened. He snapped photos quickly, each angle catching the marks, the fur, the door with its two-new lock. Parker pressed closer, nose nearly against the wood, his breath sharp and fast. The dog pawed twice at the ground, then looked back at Elliot, amber eyes fierce. "You found something real," Elliot murmured. "This isn't just a story." He stepped back and raised the radio. His voice was calm but clipped. "Dispatch, Unit 4. Logging location near Old Farm Road. Possible illegal activity. Evidence of animal harm. Sending photos and report." Static cracked, then a voice replied, thin with distance. "Copy, Unit 4. Submit details to Central System." Back at the SUV, Elliot uploaded the photos through the secure terminal. He typed a clear summary. Coordinates, evidence, recommendation for site inspection. His fingers moved fast, steady despite the cold. When the confirmation flashed across the screen, he felt a brief weight lift. At last, something solid, something no one could ignore. Parker settled in his back seat, though his body remained rigid. He stared out the window toward the barn until the trees swallowed it from sight. Night fell by the time they returned to town. The streets were quiet, lights glowing soft behind frosted glass. Elliot stopped at the station, logged the report, and checked twice that the files uploaded correctly. The evidence sat in the system, tagged and time-stamped. He let out a slow breath, a small relief. At home in his cabin, Elliot sat near the window with a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. Snow drifted steady outside. Parker lay at the door, eyes half closed yet alert, every muscle ready if called. The memory of the blood and fur lingered. Something dark lived behind those barn walls, and Elliot had taken the first step in pulling it to light. By morning, the station stirred with its usual rhythm. Deputies shuffled papers, phones rang faintly, coffee brewed in old pots. Elliot walked to the terminal, eager to follow up. He logged into the system, typing his password. The folder opened. Empty. No photos, no coordinates, no report. His stomach dropped. He searched again, cycling through directories. Nothing. Even the drafts folder had been wiped clean. His evidence had been erased overnight, leaving not a trace. Parker stood near his side, watching as Elliot's shoulders stiffened. The shepherd's eyes narrowed, ears sharp, body keyed to the change in the room. Elliot stared at the blank screen, a cold clarity cutting through him. Someone inside the station had erased the truth. The screen stared back at Elliot, blank and unforgiving. His report had vanished as though it had never existed. He leaned closer, checked the log history, searched the hidden folders. Nothing. A deliberate wipe, not an accident. Parker gave a short huff, his eyes fixed on Elliot as though he sensed the tension running cold through his handler's chest. Elliot rose, scanning the room. Deputies moved through their routines, unaware or pretending. He walked the hall, his steps steady though his thoughts spun. At the end of the corridor, a narrow door led to the server room. Few bothered with it, but Elliot knew where systems hid their shadows. Inside, the hum of machines filled the small space. The overhead light flickered, pale against rows of monitors. Elliot slid into the chair, his fingers quick over the keys. Years of military police work had given him more than patrol skills. He knew how to pull threads from tangled code. He traced the server log back to midnight. At first, the data looked clean, too clean. Then he saw it. A 5-minute gap, the system marked as maintenance. A perfect cover. Elliot bypassed the surface record, digging into the camera archive linked to the server. Grainy footage filled the screen. At 22 minutes past midnight, the door opened. A man stepped inside, moving with ease, as if he belonged there. He did. Deputy Ricky. Elliot froze, his jaw tight. The deputy carried a clipboard in one hand, but it was for show. He set it aside and went straight to the terminal. His fingers flew across the keys, confident, practiced. Within minutes, he had accessed the storage folder, highlighted Elliot's files, and deleted them one by one. No hesitation, no second glance. The camera caught his face as he turned. His expression was flat, eyes sharp, not the easy grin he wore in daylight. Then he left, leaving the folder clean, the trail erased. Elliot leaned back, breath controlled but burning inside. He had his answer. This was no glitch, no accident. The betrayal lived inside the station, wearing a badge, shaking hands, offering coffee with a smile. Parker shifted closer, his body brushing Elliot's leg. The dog's ears flicked, his eyes locked on the screen, almost as if he too understood the weight of what they had seen. Elliot saved a copy of the footage onto a small drive he carried for field notes. He slid it into his pocket, the metal cool against his palm. This was proof, but proof carried danger. Ricky had buried evidence once. He would not hesitate to do it again. The rest of the day passed in measured steps. Elliot kept his face even, his voice steady, moving through routine tasks, while his mind held the image of Ricky in the server room. He said little, choosing instead to watch. He noticed how Ricky's presence carried through the halls, how the man greeted deputies with ease, how laughter followed him. But behind that smile hid a silence that cut deeper than words. By evening, snow thickened outside. The wind pressed against the windows, howling through the pines. Elliot returned to his cabin with Parker at his side. He sat at the small desk, the drive resting near his coffee mug, its weight far heavier than its size. He looked at Parker. The shepherd sat at the door, head high, amber eyes reflecting the lamplight. The dog's loyalty was steady, unshaken by lies or politics. "We hold it quiet for now," Elliot murmured. "But this changes everything." The storm built through the night, snow twisting across the ridges like white smoke. Elliot tried to rest, yet his thoughts circled back to the erased report. The hidden barn. The children on those flyers. And now, Ricky's face under the dim camera light. The wind rose like a living thing, rattling the cabin windows. Snow drifted across the porch in thick, twisting sheets. Elliot sat in silence. Parker stretched near the door, ears twitching with each gust. The storm felt restless, a warning carried on the air. A sudden knock broke through the howl outside, sharp, frantic. Parker bolted upright, tail stiff, a low bark pressed in his throat. Elliot opened the door against the force of the wind. Laura Parker stood there, cheeks raw from the cold, breath ragged. Her coat was half-buttoned, her boots crusted with snow. Her eyes held terror. "Elliot," she gasped. "It's Joanna. She's gone." The word struck harder than the wind. "She wasn't in her bed," Laura rushed on. "The back door was open. Her boots are gone. She must have gone into the storm." Elliot grabbed his jacket and radio, motioning Laura inside, but she shook her head. "I can't stay here. Please, you have to find her." Parker shoved forward, nose working the air already. The shepherd barked once, sharp and commanding, then bounded off the porch, leash trailing from Elliot's grip. Elliot caught it quickly, following. "Stay here, Laura," he called over his shoulder. "We'll bring her back." Laura's face was pale under the snow's glare, her arms clutching herself tight. She nodded, unable to speak. Elliot let Parker lead. The shepherd circled, nose pressed to the ground, then snapped his head toward the trees. He surged forward, paws cutting a trail through the drifts. Elliot followed, flashlight beam slicing the storm. The forest swallowed them in moments. Snow pressed heavy on branches, the wind muffled under the canopy, but still fierce enough to sting the skin. Parker moved with certainty, weaving between trees, his nose glued to the faint trail left behind. Small boot prints appeared and disappeared under the falling snow, but Parker never faltered. "Good boy," Elliot breathed, pushing through drifts up to his knees. His lungs burned, his breath freezing on his scarf. But Parker drove forward, relentless. Minutes stretched like hours. The storm blinded, but the shepherd's sense cut through it. He stopped suddenly, pawing at the ground, nose pressed against a hollow in the snow. Elliot lowered his light. Tiny tracks, fresh, smaller than his own hand. Joanna's. "She's close," Elliot murmured. Parker barked once, urgent, then pushed forward again. The storm grew thicker, the air full of white haze. Elliot's flashlight caught on a broken branch, bent low, as though someone had clutched it for balance. He pressed on, Parker pulling harder. At the base of a ridge, the shepherd stopped. His ears tilted, his body taut. Elliot froze too, listening. Through the storm came a faint sound, thin, quivering, almost lost in the wind. A child's cry. Parker barked, sharp and urgent, and lunged toward the sound. Elliot followed, heart pounding. The cries grew clearer, mixed with the storm, guiding them deeper. They reached a hollow where the snow curved around a fallen log. The faint outlines of footprints circled, then vanished under the fresh fall. Parker sniffed, growled low, his body angled forward. His eyes burned into the darkness ahead. "She's close," Elliot said again, gripping the leash tighter. His flashlight beam swept across the trees, and for a heartbeat, something else flashed back. Two dim lights in the distance, piercing through the storm. Headlights. Elliot froze, Parker's growl deepening. The beams blinked once, then vanished behind the veil of snow. The sound of an engine roared faintly, retreating through the woods. Elliot's chest tightened. Joanna was still out there. But they weren't the only ones searching. The cries grew clearer as Elliot and Parker pressed through the ridge. Snow stung Elliot's face, but he forced himself forward, flashlight beam cutting a narrow line. Parker surged ahead, barking once, sharp, guiding him toward the sound. At the base of an old pine, half buried under the storm, Elliot saw her. Joanna sat curled against the trunk, arms wrapped around a worn teddy bear. Her coat was dusted white, her lips pale, her body trembling with violent shivers. "Joanna," Elliot called, his voice low but urgent. Her head lifted slowly. Her eyes blinked through frozen lashes. "Officer Elliot," she whispered, a breath more than a voice. He dropped to his knees, pulling her close. The teddy bear dangled between them, one ear torn, fabric stiff with frost. Her body felt frighteningly light. Elliot wrapped his coat around her, tucking her into his chest. "You're safe. I've got you." Parker circled them, tail stiff, nose darting through the air. The shepherd's growl built again, rising from deep in his chest. He faced the tree line, every muscle wired with alertness. Elliot followed his gaze. Through the storm, the faint glow of headlights flared once more. They flickered between trees, closer now, casting long beams across the snow. Elliot held Joanna tighter, shifting his body to shield her. "Easy, partner," he whispered, though Parker's growl only deepened. The shepherd's hackles rose, his amber eyes locked on the moving lights. The truck engine roared, tires spinning against the slush. For a moment the beams washed over the hollow, lighting Elliot's face. Joanna's small figure pressed against him. and Parker braced in front of them. Then, just as quickly, the lights jerked away. The truck reversed fast, skidding through the trees, retreating down a path hidden beneath the storm. Elliot memorized the last glimpse of its rear. His eyes locked on the plate, not whole but enough. A string of characters burned into his memory. The sound of the engine faded, swallowed by wind and snow. Silence pressed back in, heavy and raw. Parker barked once, sharp and cutting, then stood rigid, ears straining after the vanished truck. Elliot shifted Joanna in his arms. Her eyes fluttered, her breath shallow. But she clung to the bear, as if it held her upright. He pressed his cheek against her hair, murmuring steady words. "Stay with me. We're going home." Parker trotted ahead, clearing the path, nose down, tail rigid, his every move purposeful. Elliot followed, his boots sinking deep, every muscle straining against the storm. The girl's weight grew heavier in his arms, but he tightened his grip, refusing to slow. At last, the faint glow of his SUV cut through the snow. He pushed forward, opened the back seat, and laid Joanna across a blanket. Parker leapt in beside her, curling his body tight around hers, warmth pressed against her side. The girl's small hand slipped into his fur, her eyes closing with a flicker of relief. Elliot started the engine, heat rushing through the vents. He radioed for immediate medical support, his voice steady though his chest burned with urgency. Minutes later, an ambulance light cut through the storm. Laura rushed from it, her sobs breaking as she clutched Joanna in her arms. Elliot stood aside, the storm still raging around them. Parker pressed to his leg, gaze never leaving the woods. As Joanna was lifted into the ambulance, Elliot caught one last glimpse of her hand gripping the teddy bear. He turned back toward the trees. Somewhere out there, the gray truck was running. The morning after the storm, the air over Silverpine Ridge was brittle and clear. Snow lay in thick folds across the rooftops, but the roads had been cleared enough for travel. Elliot sat at his desk in the station. Parker settled at his side, watching with sharp, steady eyes. The license plate number circled in Elliot's mind. He had repeated it all night until it was carved into memory. With Joanna safe in the hospital under observation, this was his chance to push forward. He typed the digits into his report, attaching his notes about the storm, Joanna's condition, and the truck's sudden retreat. He added every detail: the flicker of headlights, the angle of retreat, Parker's response. His fingers moved fast, precise. When the file uploaded, the confirmation code flashed. Relief swept over him. Parker gave a soft huff, as if sensing the weight ease for a moment. Elliot bent down, brushing a hand across the shepherd's fur. "We've got it this time. They can't erase everything." Yet deep down, he knew better. By afternoon, when he checked the folder again, his report was gone. Not archived, not filed. Gone, as though it had never existed. The screen stared back at him, empty. His jaw tightened. He searched deeper, bypassed directories, even opened the server logs. The same gap lingered, several minutes of maintenance recorded during the early morning hours. The same pattern he had seen before. Parker shifted beside him, ears rising. His gaze turned down the hall. Elliot followed the dog's eyes. Ricky stood near the doorway, speaking with two deputies, his tone light, his grin easy. He held a thermos in one hand, gesturing casually with the other. But when his gaze brushed Elliot's desk, the smile faltered for the briefest second. Parker's growl rumbled, low and deliberate. His body went rigid, eyes locked on Ricky. The deputies laughed at whatever Ricky had said, but Parker's growl cut through the air like a blade. "Quiet," Elliot murmured, though he didn't mean it. He placed a steadying hand on Parker's back, feeling the tremor of tension beneath the fur. The shepherd did not relax. His stare never left Ricky. Ricky noticed. His grin lingered, but his eyes narrowed with something harder. He tipped his thermos in a mock toast toward Elliot, then turned back down the hall. When his footsteps faded, Parker settled into a sit, though his chest still rumbled faintly, as if the distrust lived in his bones. Elliot leaned back in his chair, the weight of silence pressing on him. He had proof once, wiped away. He had a plate number now, erased again. And always. Ricky was nearby, his presence too convenient, his smile too thin. Later, in the quiet of his cabin, Elliot replayed the events in his head. He placed the small drive with the earlier footage on the table, the only untouched evidence he had left. Parker paced near the window, ears twitching at every shift in the wind. "You see it too, don't you?" Elliot said quietly. "You know he's the one. He's the..." The shepherd stopped pacing, turned his amber eyes to Elliot, and blinked once, slow and certain. Outside, the night pressed close around the cabin. The storm had passed, but the danger had not. Elliot poured coffee into a chipped mug and sat near the desk. Parker finally settling at the door, ever watchful. The truth was clear now. His reports would not survive the station. The system was compromised. To protect Joanna, to guard what he had found, he would need to step outside the chain of command. The cabin was quiet when Elliot opened the door that evening. Snow still pressed against the eaves, the last of the storm clinging to the town. Parker padded in first, his nose sweeping the air as if every corner needed clearing before anyone else entered. Behind Elliot walked Laura and Joanna. The mother's face was pale with fatigue, her eyes still marked by the terror of nearly losing her child. Joanna clutched her worn teddy bear in one arm, her other hand resting lightly on Parker's fur, as if he were a rope that kept her steady. "She'll be safer here for now," Elliot told Laura, his voice steady, "until we're sure the roads and the house are secure." Laura nodded. She bent down to hug Joanna tight, whispering something into her ear, then kissed the top of her head. "Be good, my love. I'll come tomorrow." Her eyes lingered on Parker. "Keep her safe." The shepherd gave a low chuff, tail flicking once. Laura managed a thin smile before she slipped back into the cold night. Inside, Elliot cleared a space on the small sofa, laying out blankets and a pillow. He set a steaming mug of cocoa on the table, topped with marshmallows he kept from habit rather than need. Joanna settled slowly, teddy bear tucked under her chin, her small fingers tracing the rim of the mug. "Thank you," she whispered. Elliot gave a short nod. Words felt too heavy for the moment. Later, when the cabin grew quieter, Joanna pulled out a piece of paper from her small pack. She found a crayon tucked at the bottom and bent over the table, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth as she worked. Parker lay nearby, head tilted, watching her intently. When she finished, she held up the page. It was simple but bright. A tall man in a dark jacket, a little girl holding a bear, and beside them, a large dog with glowing amber eyes. Above their heads, she had written in shaky letters, "Parker is my hero." Elliot studied the drawing, a flicker of warmth cutting through the cold that had pressed on him for days. "That's a good likeness," he said, voice softer than usual. Joanna taped the paper to the fridge with a piece of worn tape she carried from home. Then she curled onto the sofa, her bear tucked close, Parker settling at her feet. Night deepened. Elliot worked quietly at the desk, reviewing the fragments of notes he had left. Yet his eyes often drifted to the shepherd. Parker had not chosen the sofa, nor the rug near the fire. He had stretched across the threshold of Joanna's makeshift room, his body forming a barrier, his eyes half closed, but ears twitching at every sound. Once, near midnight, Elliot rose to check. The dog lifted his head, amber eyes catching the faint light, then let it lower again, unbothered. He was awake enough to guard, calm enough to let the girl rest. Joanna stirred once in her sleep, murmuring Parker's name as though it steadied her. The shepherd gave a low huff, his tail tapping the floor once before silence reclaimed the room. Elliot watched them both. The girl safe for now, the dog unmoving in his vigil. The storm outside had passed, but he knew the greater storm had not. Morning came with a thin sun pushing through the snow clouds. Elliot brewed coffee in the small pot, the smell filling the cabin. Joanna was still asleep on the sofa, curled under blankets, her teddy bear pressed close. Parker lay across the threshold as he had all night, his body stretched like a guardrail between her and the world. The knock came just as Elliot poured his cup. 3 sharp raps against the door. Parker's head shot up, ears tall. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Elliot moved to the door, his hand brushing the dog's flank in reassurance. When he opened it, Ricky stood on the porch. He held a paper bag in one hand, steam rising faintly from inside, and wore his usual easy grin. "Morning," Ricky said, lifting the bag. "Brought breakfast? Figured you could use it after last night." Elliot didn't answer right away. He watched Ricky's face, the grin that never quite touched the eyes. Behind him, Parker stepped forward, planting himself in the doorway. His body blocked the entrance, his amber eyes locked on Ricky. The growl came again, low and steady. Ricky chuckled, though it sounded thinner than usual. "Still doesn't like me, huh?" He tilted his head, peering past Elliot's shoulder into the cabin. His gaze lingered a beat too long. "Heard Joanna's staying with you. Brave kid. Glad she's safe." Elliot stood still, his voice even. "She's resting. She doesn't need visitors." Ricky shrugged, extending the bag. "Biscuits, hot coffee. No trouble meant." Parker's growl deepened. He shifted forward until his chest brushed Elliot's leg, hackles bristling. The message was clear. One more step, and he would act. Ricky's smile flickered. For a moment, the mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his eyes sharp. Then it was back again, casual and easy. He set the bag on the porch rail. "Suit yourself?" he said. His tone carried a trace of something colder, hidden under the surface. He glanced down at Parker. That dog's got good instincts. Sometimes too good. Elliot kept his gaze steady. Instincts save lives. Silence stretched. Snow dripped from the eaves, the wind cutting around the porch. Ricky shifted the thermos in his hand, then nodded. "See you at the station." He turned and walked down the steps, boots crunching in the snow. Parker didn't move until Ricky was halfway down the lane. Then, and only then, the growl faded. His body stayed rigid, ears forward, until the deputy vanished from sight. Elliot closed the door, his pulse steady but heavy. Joanna stirred on the sofa, her voice faint. "Was that someone from the station?" "Yes," Elliot said gently. "Nothing to worry about." Parker made sure of it. The girl nodded, her eyes drifting back to sleep. Parker lay down again, though his gaze stayed fixed on the door. Elliot returned to the desk. He looked at the small drive resting near his notes, the only copy of the footage Ricky hadn't touched. The station was compromised. He couldn't trust the system, not anymore. If he wanted the truth uncovered, he needed help outside Silverpine Ridge. That evening, when Joanna slept again and Parker kept his watch, Elliot pulled out his secure phone. He typed a single message to a name he hadn't used in years. Avery Price. Need your eyes. Data breach, internal sabotage. Suspect location tied to missing children. Can you help? He hit send and leaned back, the cabin quiet except for Parker's slow breath and the crackle of the fire. The reply came minutes later, Send files. I'll dig. White Hollow keeps coming up in my scans. Cabin in the woods looks dirty. Elliot stared at the screen, his chest tightening. The storm outside had ended, but another storm waited in the forest. The fire burned low in the cabin as Elliot opened his laptop. Parker curled nearby with his ears twitching at every snap of the wood. Joanna slept soundly, her small breaths steady. The teddy bear clutched tight against her chest. Elliot plugged the small drive into the port, his fingers moving quickly. A message pinged almost at once. "Link secure. I'm in." Avery's typing filled the screen, the words sharp and efficient. "Send me everything you've got." Elliot uploaded the erased files, the fragments of notes he had salvaged, and the coordinates of the abandoned barn. He hesitated, then added the partial plate from the gray truck. A spinning wheel flickered. Then Avery's voice crackled through the encrypted call line. "You weren't exaggerating," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, but beneath it ran a thread of urgency. "Someone inside your department is scrubbing hard. I had to go through 3 different layers to even touch the backup." Elliot leaned closer to the mic. "What did you find? The blood, the fur, your barn report, it all checks out. But that's not the worst of it." Keys clattered on her end. "I pulled older files, things marked as low priority. Pets gone missing for months. A pattern. Always near the same section of woods, always filed under vague terms." "White Hollow," Elliot murmured. "Exactly." Avery's tone sharpened. "I cross-checked with county land records. White Hollow was part of a hunting reserve decades ago. Now it's listed under a shell company. No activity, no taxes filed. Perfect cover. And one more thing, your plate number? Same company address. Whoever runs that truck is tied to White Hollow." Elliot's chest tightened. "So it's not just one man?" "No," Avery said. "It's a network. And they're organized enough to have friends in your station. Ricky, maybe more." Parker gave a low rumble, as though agreeing. Elliot reached down, brushing the dog's flank, steadying himself through the shepherd's solid presence. "What about access?" Elliot asked. "Can we track them?" A pause, then Avery's voice again, quick with confidence. "I slipped a ping into the truck's registration system. If they move, we'll know. I can feed you a GPS trail, but you'll have to follow it quietly. No backup. If the wrong ear's here, it will vanish again." Elliot glanced at Joanna, sleeping safe for now. "Quiet is what we have." The call ended, leaving only the soft hum of the laptop and the steady crackle of the fire. Elliot sat back, his thoughts heavy. The barn had been one shadow. White Hollow promised something deeper, darker, a place where silence swallowed too many voices. Parker rose and padded to the window, pressing his nose against the glass. The night outside was still, the snow reflecting a pale glow under the moon. Yet the dog's body stayed tense, as though he already felt the pull of the trail waiting in the forest. Elliot closed the laptop and pocketed the drive. He crouched beside the shepherd, their eyes meeting in the dim light. "Tomorrow we follow," he whispered. Parker blinked once, slow and deliberate. The weight of truth pressed closer now. Silverpine Ridge was not holding its secrets by accident. It was protecting something built in the shadows of White Hollow. And if they didn't move soon, more would vanish. The morning broke pale and brittle. Silverpine Ridge stirred with the sound of snowplows on distant streets. But Elliot's cabin stayed silent. Joanna remained bundled on the sofa, still asleep, her teddy bear tucked close. Parker lay near the door, ears twitching at every faint sound outside, his amber eyes alert even in rest. Elliot slid the small drive into his jacket pocket and strapped on his gear. The laptop screen glowed faintly with a new message from Avery. Movement detected. Gray truck active, GPS trail live. Heading north into the forest. Coordinates attached. He closed the lid, heart steady but heavy. "Time to go, partner," he said. Parker rose instantly, tail low but stiff, posture firm. They left the cabin quietly, Elliot locking the door behind him. The SUV's engine grumbled to life, exhaust clouding into the cold. He steered toward the northern ridge, snow crunching under the tires as the pines thickened and the air turned sharp. The GPS tracker pulsed on the screen, a faint blinking dot winding through the forest roads. Elliot followed at a distance, headlights dimmed. Parker stood in the back, paws braced, gaze fixed on the trail ahead, as though he could see the path even without the signal. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. Houses thinned, then vanished altogether, replaced by endless trees and the crunch of snow under the SUV's tires. The road narrowed into a rutted track, barely cleared, each turn bending deeper into isolation. After an hour, Elliot pulled off the road and cut the engine. Silence pressed in. The GPS showed the truck had stopped, not far ahead, beyond a rise in the land. He could go no further without being seen. "On foot from here," Elliot whispered. He clipped Parker's leash, but let it hang loose. The shepherd pressed close to his side, muscles taut, nose twitching at every shift of wind. They moved quietly through the trees, snow muffling their steps. The forest opened after a ridge, and Elliot crouched low behind a line of fallen logs. Beyond, in a clearing half hidden by pines, stood the cabin. It was older than he expected, a squat structure with a sagging roof and walls darkened by time. Yet smoke curled from a metal chimney, and tire ruts scarred the snow near its door. Parker pressed low beside him, ears pinned forward, a faint growl stirring in his chest. Elliot lifted his binoculars, scanning carefully. The cabin's porch was cluttered with crates and tools. But what caught his eye lay to the side, a row of cages, iron bars frosted with snow. Shapes shifted inside, small, fragile. The glint of fur, the faint sound of claws scraping metal. Elliot's jaw tightened. The missing pets, the blood near the barn, the whispers of something darker, it all pointed here. White Hollow was no rumor. It was alive before his eyes. He lowered the binoculars and brushed Parker's shoulder. "You were right," he murmured. The shepherd huffed softly, his gaze fixed on the cages. He wanted to move, to act, but Elliot held him back. Timing mattered. Elliot studied the scene again. Two men paced near the porch, rifles slung casually, their breath fogging in the cold. Another figure emerged briefly from the cabin, broad-shouldered, coat heavy, before disappearing inside again. The pieces fit into something larger than Elliot had feared. This wasn't one hunter. This was organized, guarded. Parker shifted suddenly, ears snapping to the side. Elliot froze. From the trees behind them came the faint crunch of snow under deliberate steps. He turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. A familiar voice cut through the silence. "You should have stayed out of this, Carter." Ricky stepped into view, pistol in hand, the grin gone from his face. Elliot rose slowly from his crouch, his hands loose but ready. Parker stood firm at his side, teeth bared, a low growl rolling from deep in his chest. Snowflakes drifted through the silence, settling on Ricky's pistol. The deputy's easy grin was gone. His eyes were hard now, calculating. "You never learned," Ricky said, his voice flat. "Some things aren't meant to be uncovered." Elliot's gaze cut past him, back toward the clearing. The cages stood lined against the cabin, their iron bars slick with frost. Inside, shapes shifted. Small bodies, fur pressed thin against the cold metal. The faint whimper of a dog carried on the wind. "So it's true," Elliot said, his voice steady. "You've been covering for them." Ricky tilted his head. "Covering? No. Controlling. The forest hides more than trees, Carter. It hides profit. Rare animals, trained dogs, even children if the price is right. And you? You should have stayed behind your desk." Parker's growl deepened. The shepherd stepped forward, muscles coiled. Ricky's pistol twitched in warning. "Easy, Mutt," he muttered. "Or I put you down first." Elliot's jaw tightened. "He sees what you are. That's why he never trusted you." The deputy chuckled, though the sound carried no humor. Dogs always know. That's why they're useful, until they're dangerous. And yours has outlived his welcome. Elliot shifted slightly, drawing Ricky's attention while his eyes scanned for openings. The men on the porch still paced, unaware of the scene in the trees. If Parker lunged now, the gunfire would echo across the clearing. Timing mattered. "You erased my reports," Elliot said, stalling. "You buried the plate number, the barn, everything." Ricky shrugged. And it worked. No one questions a deputy who's been here for years. They drink my coffee, laugh at my jokes, and never ask what happens when the snow covers tracks. Silverpine Ridge stays quiet because I keep it quiet. Elliot's grip tightened on Parker's leash, though the dog strained forward, his body electric with tension. "That quiet ends here," Elliot said. Ricky raised the pistol higher. "No, it ends with you." For a heartbeat, the forest stilled. Then Parker barked, sharp and explosive, breaking the silence. His body surged forward, pulling against Elliot's grip. Ricky flinched, the gun swinging. Elliot dropped low, pulling Parker with him just as a shot cracked through the trees. Snow burst from the log behind them. The shepherd lunged again, snarling, his teeth flashing in the pale light. Ricky stepped back, the pistol jerking in his hand. His grin returned, thin and cold. "You won't leave this ridge alive, Carter. Neither will your dog." From the cabin, the door creaked open. Another figure stepped out, broad-shouldered, carrying a lantern. His voice cut across the clearing. "Everything all right?" Ricky didn't look away from Elliot. "Handled," he called back. "Stay inside." Elliot steadied his breath. The cages loomed behind Ricky, the cries inside growing clearer. Proof stood in plain sight now. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It was alive, trapped, waiting. Ricky's pistol stayed locked on Elliot, his finger tightening. "You've got one choice left. Walk away, forget this, or—" His smile sharpened. "Or Parker bleeds first." The shepherd growled louder, his stance unyielding. Elliot's chest tightened, every muscle prepared. The snow thickened, muffling the forest in white silence. Elliot met Ricky's gaze and knew the fight was coming. The forest held its breath. Ricky's pistol hovered steady, the barrel dark against the pale snow. Parker crouched low, teeth bared, a growl vibrating through the air like a storm waiting to break. Then movement flickered at the edge of the clearing. Shadows emerged from the trees. 3, 4 men, rifles slung, their boots crunching in rhythm. The lantern light caught their faces, hard and cold, men who had guarded these woods for too long. Ricky's grin widened. "See? You're outnumbered." Elliot shifted his weight, heart pounding. His breath clouded the air, sharp and ragged. The cages rattled faintly in the wind, cries of trapped animals cutting through the silence. It fueled the fury inside him. The first man raised his rifle. Before the barrel found its mark, Parker exploded forward. His body blurred against the snow, a snarl ripping from his chest. The rifle cracked, echoing across the clearing. Parker slammed into the gunman, knocking him back, teeth snapping at the man's arm. "Parker!" Elliot shouted, diving low as another shot split the air. Snow burst around him, stinging his face. He rolled behind a stack of crates, his pistol drawn. Ricky fired again, the bullet slicing the air where Elliot had been seconds before. The deputy's face twisted. No grin now, only raw hatred. "You should have left the girl. You should have left this town." Parker barked, feral and wild, his body locked in a struggle with one of the guards. Blood streaked the snow. His own, a graze along his flank. But still, he fought. Teeth clamping down, forcing the rifle from the man's grasp. Another gunman advanced. Elliot fired once, clean and precise. The man dropped his weapon, falling hard into the snow. Chaos shattered the clearing. Shots, snarls, shouted curses drowned by the storm. Through the noise came a voice, high and desperate. "Parker!" Elliot's head jerked toward the sound. Joanna stood at the tree line, her small frame barely visible through the storm. Her arms clutched the teddy bear, her eyes wide with terror. She must have followed, tracked the trail through the snow. Her cry cut through Parker like fire. The shepherd broke free of his opponent, blood dripping from his side, and hurled himself toward Elliot. Another shot cracked. Parker lunged, knocking Elliot flat just as the bullet hissed past his shoulder, slamming into the crate. "Stay down!" Elliot barked, shoving himself upright. Fury burned through him now, hot against the cold. He fired twice, forcing another gunman back into the shadows. Parker leapt again, snarling, driving a guard into the snow with the full weight of his body. Only Ricky remained, his pistol raised, his breath ragged. He stepped closer, the barrel steady, his eyes locked on Elliot. "You don't win this," he spat. Elliot rose, snow clinging to his jacket, his pistol in a hout. Parker limped to his side, chest heaving, but his eyes burned fierce. The shepherd stood tall, his body between Elliot and the gun. Ricky sneered. "One more step and I put him down." From behind, Joanna's voice cracked through the storm again. "Parker, don't let him!" The shepherd's ears flicked. He barked once, sharp, his body surging forward with the last of his strength. Ricky fired, the shot echoing like thunder. But Parker struck first, slamming into Ricky's chest, teeth tearing into his arm. The pistol flew into the snow. Elliot moved fast, tackling Ricky hard, the two men crashing into the drift. Fists flew, breath ragged, blood mixing with snow. Ricky snarled, fighting like a cornered animal. But Elliot's fury drove him harder. Finally, with Parker's jaws still locked on Ricky's sleeve, Elliot ripped the deputy's arm down and pressed him into the ground, the cold muzzle of his own pistol against Ricky's temple. The forest quieted, only the sound of Parker's heavy breaths and Joanna's sobs from the trees. Snow fell steady, covering the battlefield in white. Ricky lay pinned, blood streaking his face, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear at last. The clearing was a ruin of churned snow and broken silence. Ricky writhed beneath Elliot's weight, his breath shallow, his face smeared with blood. Parker held his sleeve in a tight grip. The shepherd's teeth clenched even as his body trembled with exhaustion. Joanna stood at the tree line, her sobs carried on the wind, her small figure a reminder of what had been at stake all along. Then came a new sound. Engines. The low rumble of vehicles cutting through the forest paths, headlights slicing across the snow. Elliot lifted his head, his pistol still steady against Ricky. Parker's ears flicked, his growl soft but unrelenting. From the trees emerged black-coated figures, federal agents, their badges glinting in the weak dawn light. Voices rang clear, commanding, moving with precision. Within minutes, rifles were lowered toward the cabin. Shouts thundered. "Hands up! Drop your weapons!" The guards near the porch froze, their rifles clattering into the snow. One by one they were dragged down, their arms bound tight. The door to the cabin flew open, more agents pouring inside. Cries of frightened animals filled the clearing, followed by the metallic clink of chains broken. Ricky's bravado shattered. His eyes darted toward the arriving agents, then back to Elliot. For the first time, the grin was gone, replaced with the pallor of a man cornered. Elliot yanked him to his feet and shoved him forward, Parker limping at his side but still snapping whenever Ricky twitched. An agent strode forward, cuffs gleaming in hand. "Deputy Ricky Holloway, you are under arrest." His voice carried sharp authority. Ricky's face twisted, his body resisting, but Parker's snarl near his arm broke whatever strength he had left. His wrists were locked in iron. As they dragged him toward the waiting vehicles, Ricky glanced back. His eyes found Elliot, then the shepherd at his side. The deputy's face had gone pale, drained of all the swagger it once held. He looked like a ghost already buried beneath the snow. Elliot turned away. He didn't need Ricky's eyes anymore. The truth had spoken louder than any words. The cages, the blood, the cries in the night. Joanna stumbled forward, her small boots crunching through the snow. She flung herself against Parker, her arms wrapping around his neck. Tears streamed down her cheeks, soaking into the shepherd's fur. "You're safe," she whispered, voice breaking. "You're my hero." Parker gave a low huff, his tail tapping weakly against the snow. His flank still bled where the bullet had grazed him, but his body leaned into Joanna's embrace as though nothing else mattered. Elliot knelt beside them, his hand brushing Parker's shoulder. The dog's amber eyes lifted to his, tired but unbroken. "You saved her," Elliot murmured. "You saved all of us." The agents moved quickly, leading the shackled men toward the line of vehicles, carrying the rescued animals out of the cabin, wrapping them in blankets. The dawn spread across the ridge, the first light of morning bleeding red and gold over the snow. It painted the ground in hues of fire, a reminder of how close the night had come to consuming them all. Joanna tightened her grip around Parker, her tears falling freely. "Don't ever leave me," she whispered into his fur. The shepherd pressed his head gently against her chest, the only answer he needed to give. Elliot rose, scanning the clearing. The nightmare had been dragged into the open, but the scars of it would linger. Silverpine Ridge had been stained, yet it had also been given a guardian who would never let its silence turn to shadow again. Days passed, and Silverpine Ridge slowly breathed again. The cages had been cleared, the wounded animals sent to care, and federal agents had driven away with their prisoners. Ricky had left the ridge in handcuffs, his head bowed, his eyes hollow. The scars of his betrayal still hung in the air, but the town began to gather itself, piecing hope back together. Elliot returned often to check on Joanna. Her spirit, though shaken, had not broken. She sat at the small table in Elliot's cabin one afternoon, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth as she worked with scissors, thread, and a strip of leather. Parker lay stretched across the rug nearby, his bandaged flank rising and falling steadily. Every so often, his eyes flicked toward the girl, watching with calm patience. When she finished, Joanna held up her creation. It was simple, rough around the edges, but made with care. A leather collar, hand-cut and stitched, with a round tag at the center. She had carved one word into the metal with uneven strokes. Guardian. She stood and walked to Parker, kneeling in front of him. "This is yours," she whispered, "because that's what you are, my guardian." The shepherd tilted his head, then lowered it gently, allowing her to slip the collar around his neck. When the clasp clicked shut, Parker gave a soft huff, his tail thumping once against the floor. He pressed his head into Joanna's chest, as though accepting the title without question. That evening, the town gathered in the square. Word had spread quickly of the arrests, of the cabin in White Hollow, of Elliot and Parker standing against the storm. People filled the space, bundled in coats, their breath clouding in the cold air. Lanterns glowed against the snow, casting warm halos on the gathered faces. Elliot stood at the edge, Parker beside him, Joanna clinging to the shepherd's fur. The sheriff raised his hand for silence, his deep voice carrying over the crowd. Silverpine Ridge has faced darkness, but tonight we honor those who brought us light. He gestured toward Elliot and Parker. The crowd erupted in applause. Some clapped, others simply stood with tears in their eyes. But all gazes fell on the shepherd, with the new collar gleaming against his fur. Joanna stepped forward, her small voice breaking the hush. He saved me. He saved all of us. She pointed to the collar. He's not just a dog, he's our guardian. The words struck like fire through the square. Applause swelled again, louder this time, echoing against the surrounding mountains. Parker stood tall, his amber eyes calm, his body steady as though he understood he was no longer just a canine. He had become a symbol. Elliot's chest tightened as he looked at the shepherd. He saw more than a partner. He saw the bond that had carried them through snow and betrayal, through bullets and silence. Parker had stood against the storm, and now the town stood for him. The applause faded into quiet reverence. People bowed their heads, some wiping their eyes, others whispering words of thanks. Joanna clung to Parker's neck, her tears dampening his fur once more, but this time they were tears of relief, of gratitude. Parker's tail wagged slowly, a single beat of reassurance. In the glow of the lanterns, the word on his collar caught the light, shining bright for all to see. Guardian. The snow had begun to soften under the first warmth of morning. Sunlight stretched across Silverpine Ridge, gilding the rooftops in gold and washing the mountains in a pale fire that made the peaks glow as if the storm had never touched them. Elliot stood on the steps of the sheriff's office, Parker at his side. The shepherd's new collar gleamed in the light, the word guardian shining against his sable fur. Townsfolk moved quietly through the square, their faces tired but brighter than days past. There was no longer fear in their eyes, only relief and the fragile beginnings of trust. Elliot let the silence sit with him. The weight of the last nights, the storm, the cabin, the betrayal, still pressed in his bones. Yet beside him, Parker stood steady, chest high, eyes fixed on the ridges that had once seemed to hide only shadows. The shepherd no longer looked like a patrol dog. He looked like something more, watchful, resolute, unyielding. Inside the station, voices carried low as deputies shuffled papers and federal agents packed their files. On the bulletin board near the entrance hung a crayon drawing, taped with uneven corners. Joanna's work. It showed a tall man, a girl clutching a teddy bear, and a dog with amber eyes. Above them, the words she had written in block letters stretched bright across the paper. Every hero has 4 legs. Elliot paused to look at it again before stepping back outside. The drawing spoke louder than any report, louder than the applause in the square. It told the truth of what had happened here, of what one dog had carried for all of them. Parker shifted closer, brushing against Elliot's leg. The shepherd's wound had begun to heal, the bandages thinner now, but his spirit had not dimmed. His gaze scanned the street, the rooftops, the ridges beyond, always alert. Elliot reached down, resting his hand against the dog's collar. "You've given this town something I couldn't," Elliot said quietly. "Faith." A breeze swept through, carrying the smell of pine and wood smoke. Children played near the steps, their laughter cutting through the silence that had weighed on Silverpine Ridge for too long. Joanna was among them, her teddy bear tucked in her arm as she ran. Yet she paused often to glance toward Parker, as though checking that her guardian still stood near. The sheriff stepped out of the station, his boots striking the steps beside Elliot. He looked over the town with a long breath, then at Parker. "You've done more than keep the peace. You've given it back to us." Elliot said nothing, only nodded once. His hand stayed on Parker's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of the shepherd's breath. The sun climbed higher, spilling over the ridges, turning the snow into a river of gold. For the first time since arriving in Silverpine, Elliot felt the cold lift from his shoulders. He knew the shadows hadn't vanished completely. There would always be dangers tucked away in the mountains, secrets waiting. But he also knew that whatever came, he wouldn't face it alone. Beside him stood more than a partner. Beside him stood the guardian of Silverpine Ridge. Elliot looked at Parker, who turned his head, eyes catching the light. The shepherd gave a soft huff, almost like agreement. Together they faced the ridges, the storm behind them, the morning ahead. The story of Elliot, Joanna, and Parker is more than a tale of danger and betrayal in a snowbound town. At its heart, it is a reminder of the unshakable bond between people and animals, and the quiet strength that German shepherds bring into human lives. Parker was not just a trained canine. He was loyalty made flesh, courage on 4 legs, a steady presence that carried a child through terror and a man through doubt. German shepherds are often celebrated for their intelligence and bravery. But this story highlights something deeper: their instinct for love, their gift of protection, and their ability to heal wounds no medicine can touch. Parker stood not only as a guardian of Joanna's safety, but also as a guardian of faith, teaching an entire town that hope can be found in the most silent of protectors. Through every step in the snow, through every moment of fear and confrontation, Parker reminded Silverpine Ridge and us that compassion is not weakness, but power. By embracing animals with kindness and respect, we embrace the best parts of ourselves. Let Parker's collar, etched with the word guardian, serve as a symbol for more than one town. Let it remind us to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to honor loyalty when we see it, and to stand firm against cruelty, whether it hides in forests or in silence. Every hero does not carry a badge or a weapon. Sometimes they walk beside us on 4 legs, eyes bright with trust, hearts steady with devotion. May we meet that devotion with gratitude. And may Parker's story inspire us to love, to protect, and to live with courage that outlasts the storm.